Yes, Your Honor.
Detective, kind of going through, I want to get into one of the things you do is obviously you're trying to get a statement from the defendant in any cases like this, correct?
Yes, I do.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel exhibits 37, 38, those exhibits. Detective, I'm going to show you what has been marked as exhibit 37 for identification purposes. Could you tell the jury what that is?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but 37's already been admitted.
I'm sorry, I thought we had 36.
37 was already admitted.
Okay, now I gotta go 38, 38, and 39.
And 37 was training record / outline. And what it was.
Okay, so let's try exhibit 38 then. Can you tell the jury what this is?
Yep, this is a typed written statement. It's 3 pages long. It's signed by Chris Schurr on April 15, 2022.
And how did you get this statement?
I requested through his defense. I believe Mr. Dodge facilitated getting this to my office.
Okay, and what you do is after you get this, you turn it over to our office as making part of the case file, correct?
Yep, this becomes a part of my report.
And I'm gonna show you exhibit 39. Could you tell the jury what this is?
Yep, after that original statement, I, along with my colleagues, had a couple of follow-up questions. Numbered those out. I believe it was 13 specific follow-up questions. Purely voluntary, but I reached back out to Mr. Dodge and I asked if Officer Schurr would be willing to answer these follow-up questions, which he did. So this is, again, typed answers to those questions, signed by Chris Schurr on May 13 of 2022. It's 3 pages.
And once again, you made those part of the file as well?
Yes, I did.
I move the admission of appeals exhibits 38 and 39. No, Your Honor.
38 and 39 are now admitted.
And just to be clear, there was not during the interview, this was just typed
Correct.
at some point in time away from you.
Yes.
There's one follow thing. Why is the state police investigating this happened in the city of Grand Rapids? Why is the state police on this?
Yeah, we have a formal agreement with the Grand Rapids Police Department. Again, I work for the Michigan State Police. And before my time and above my rank, formal agreement was made with the PD that if they had an officer-involved shooting, that our department goes and investigates those. So really, I was there on invitation based on a formal agreement that was in place ahead of time.
Thank you. Anything further?
Morning, Detective.
Morning, sir.
I just want to ask you some questions about the statement that was just admitted
Mhm.
and the circumstances under which they were admitted, under which you obtained them. You touched briefly on this. Now this was obviously a case that drew a lot of attention from the public. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you were among several detectives that were working on this case?
Yes.
Okay. And you recognize that Christopher Schurr was under no obligation to give a statement, right?
No, this is purely voluntary.
Okay. And if you, in a normal case, went out to talk to somebody and said, we would like to talk to you, if they said, we don't want to talk to you, then you can't force them to talk to you, right?
No, and that carries no weight with me, the response.
Okay, but you were doing this investigation, there's a lot going on, and you wanted to hear from him, and you reached out to his attorneys, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And by that point, he had Mr. Dodge as counsel, right?
Yes.
And I think you said that the first statement was in April 15th of 2022?
Yes.
And that's something that was signed by the defendant,
Yes.
but came through his attorneys?
Yes, it was.
Okay. That's not an interview you had with him shortly after the incident or anything like that?
No, there was no interview.
And in a case like this where there's a shooting, you actually give the officer some time to reflect anyway, right? Before you would try to interview them, right?
That's standard. That's typical.
Okay. So you don't pounce on them like right after the shooting and start asking them questions, right?
If they wanted to, I would not say no, but I've not had that experience with an officer before.
Okay. And then you got the statement, you asked some follow-up questions, and you actually wrote questions on the second statement that's dated May 13th. Is that fair?
Yes.
And again, it came through counsel, and to the best of the ability, you got, you believe that you got some answers to the questions you had?
Yes.
Okay. But that's not everything that you might have wanted to ask Officer Schurr, right?
No, sometimes when I'm interviewing somebody, those interviews can go on for hours and hours and hours. This was, if I had to ask some pointing questions, it was a short list.
Okay. And so I think it's 13 questions. That's pales in comparison to the number of questions that he could be asked on, say, like cross-examination, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, Your Honor.
Don't see any hands raised on the jury. Step down again.
You may, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You may step down. Any additional?
No additional rebuttal, Your Honor.
All right, so I would like to take a break because looks like the evidence is complete, but we need to go over some things outside of your presence prior to closing arguments. And so I'm gonna ask you to go into the back and we'll take a 15-minute break right now. And meanwhile, even though all the evidence is finished, you're not deliberating yet, so I'm gonna ask you to still leave your notes and not discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else, and also continue to refrain from any new reports in the media and social media, and then we'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Okay? You may be seated. Did my law clerk provide you with a set of the final instructions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
On a Friday. And we sent over some proposed additions, which changes.
I would like to take a break and go in the back to discuss anything that you can discuss as far as hashing out the instructions. I also noted that on the expert witness instruction 5.10, there's several experts that are missing and some that their expertise is misstated. So I'm correcting that particular instruction. But if you want to come in the back, you can make sure that they're complete, and if there's any objections, we can deal with that when we come back on the record.
Okay, so are you saying that we don't have the final instructions yet?
I'm saying, my law clerk provided you with the final instructions. I noted that there's some things that need to be inserted. I don't have the, Ms. Hamilton mentioned that they sent that you sent something over, I don't know if there were corrections or objections. Either way, I haven't seen those. If they were sent over the weekend or this morning, I have not seen those. So I would like the opportunity to review those before saying these are the absolute final set of instructions.
Okay, Your Honor.
Okay? And then I did know that there were a couple that were missing, so, but I would like the opportunity to address any additions and that sort of thing without having it allow dragged out discussion on record about them. But if you don't want to, that's fine. I just thought it would.
Whatever works first.
I just thought it would be easier.
Just one thing, Your Honor. You didn't ask at least one question. You want to put that on the record before we forget?
Thank you for reminding me about that. So I did want to put the questions that were presented by the jury but not asked of the defendant, and then this particular witness that just stepped down, there were two questions that were not asked of him. As far as the defendant, there was a question by one of the jurors that we did not ask him, which is, and that's after discussing at a sidebar, and that is, has your wife ever asked you to get something from a different area of your house? When you don't find it, does she take your word for it, or does she go check herself? It was not asked. Also, did you speak to anyone about the incident between April 2nd and when the statement was submitted? That was not asked. And also not asked is, did anyone offer their suggestions or advice on how to write the statement? Those were questions that were not asked of the defendant because they were found not to be appropriate to do so. And then of this particular witness, there were two questions that were not asked. The first is, can you explain your thought on body cam from Becker's reference? That was not asked. And then, have you ever testified in a case for the prosecution where the police officer was found guilty? If so, how many? That was also not asked. And I believe those are all the questions that needed to be placed on the record that were from the jury, not asked, but needed to still be placed on the record. I do have all of the jury questions, and I've noted with an X the ones that were not asked, and a check mark the ones that were. So that will be part of the file. And is there anything else before we recess briefly to go over these instructions?
Nothing, Your Honor. No, Your Honor.